Okay, before you open that document and start typing, give me a minute. Sit with me for a second. Because I've watched a lot of people open this assessment, read question one, and immediately feel their soul leave their body. And I get it. It opens with customer transaction history, CRM records, mobile foot traffic estimates, neighborhood demographic estimates, card spending data. And your brain goes, oh, this is a data science test. I applied for a social media internship. I have a whole aesthetic. I know how to shoot a flat lay. What is a ZCTA? So let me tell you what this is. And the part that matters more, let me tell you what it is not. Because the gap between those two things is where most people lose points they never had to lose. This is not a test of whether you already know the answers. If it were, we would have asked closed questions with right answers, and we would have graded them in about 9 minutes with a rubric. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that somebody wrote 8 questions where more than one conclusion is defensible, on purpose. They said it out loud in the description. In several cases, more than one conclusion may be defensible. Why would anyone build a test like that? Because they're not reading your conclusion. They're reading the shape of how you got there. Think about what it's like to work on a fashion brand for real, not the version on your Pinterest board, the real version. You come in on a Monday and somebody hands you a spreadsheet of last quarter's orders, a screenshot of an Instagram Insights dashboard, a PDF from some panel data vendor that costs more than your rent, a text message from the founder that says, "Why is Houston suddenly popping off?" and a question about where to spend the next chunk of budget. Nothing lines up. Nothing is measured the same way. Half of it is a guess wearing a lab coat. The person who is useful in that room is not the person who knows the most software. It's the person who can look at that pile and say, okay, here's what we know. Here's what we're assuming. Here's the one thing that if it turns out to be false, breaks the whole plan. Let's go find out about that thing first. That's the entire assessment. 8 different rooms, same skill. So here's the frame I want you to carry through all 8 questions. 3 moves. That's it. Move 1. Separate what you saw from what you concluded. An observation is 70% of orders ship to 3 zip codes. An inference is our customer is affluent. Those are wildly different animals, and the second one might be completely wrong. Whenever you write a sentence in this assessment, you should be able to point at it and say which one it is. If you can't, rewrite it. Move 2. Name your assumptions out loud, not in a disclaimer at the bottom, in the body. This holds if the shipping address is a reasonable proxy for where the customer lives, which breaks for gifting, for people who ship to work, and for anyone using a package locker. That sentence takes 6 seconds to write, and it is worth more than a paragraph of confident vibes. Move 3. Say what would change your mind. Every single answer should contain some version of, if I saw X, I would abandon this. That's not weakness. That is the single loudest signal that you're thinking instead of performing. Anybody can produce a confident recommendation. Very few people can produce a confident recommendation and the exact evidence that would kill it. If you do nothing else, if you retain one thing from all of this, do those 3 moves in every answer. Observation versus inference. Named assumption, kill condition. You will be in the top slice of responses before you write a single clever thing. One more thing before we get into the questions. The guidance says 150 to 300 words per answer, and I need you to take that seriously because length is a trap here. I have read 1,500-word answers that said nothing. I have read 200-word answers that made me want to hire the person immediately.
Density beats volume. A specific example beats a general principle. One worked-through mechanism beats 5 listed considerations. If you catch yourself writing a list of things you would consider, stop. Pick the 2 that matter most and explain why the others are lower priority. That choice is the answer. The list is a way of avoiding the answer. And please, please don't give me a persona. Do not write, "Meet Ava, 26, lives in a loft, loves oat milk and slow fashion." I'm begging. That's a mood board with a birthday. It tells me nothing about how you think and everything about what you've absorbed from marketing decks. We'll talk about what to do instead when we get to question 4. Okay, let's go. 8 questions. I'll tell you what each one is really asking, where people fumble, and how to think about it. I'm not giving you answers. There aren't any. I'm giving you the map of the room. Question 1. Organizing the market before modeling. So the setup is, here's a giant pile of data about one city. Before you build anything, tell us how you'd represent this world so that a customer, a household, a block group, a zip code, a business, a neighborhood, and a time period don't all collapse into the same kind of thing just because they happen to sit in the same place. Read that again, because the question is doing something sneaky and generous at the same time. It's telling you the failure mode in advance. The failure is, everything becomes a row in one giant table, keyed on location, and now you can't tell the difference between a person and a place. Here's why that matters, in fashion terms, with no math. A customer is a person with a history. She bought a coat in November, returned a size, came back in March. She has a timeline. A household is a shared budget and a shared closet and possibly a shared credit card, which is why your 2 customers in one apartment might be one wallet, or might be a mother and a daughter with completely different taste. A block group is a census invention. It's a shape on a map, roughly 600 to 3,000 people, and every number attached to it is a survey estimate with a margin of error that people habitually ignore. A zip code... Okay, a zip code is not a place. A zip code is a mail delivery route. It's a set of addresses the Postal Service groups together for efficiency. It has no legal boundary. It changes. The census had to invent a whole separate thing, the ZCTA, just to approximate zip codes as areas, and the approximation is imperfect by design. So when somebody hands you a beautiful choropleth map of zip-level spending, you're looking at a map of mail routes, colored in. Sit with that. A business is a point with an address, an opening date, a closing date that you probably don't have, and a category label that's frequently wrong. A neighborhood is a social object with no fixed boundary at all. Ask 3 people in Atlanta where Old Fourth Ward ends, and you'll get 4 answers and 1 argument. And a time period? A week of foot traffic, a quarter of economic indicators, a year of county statistics. These are windows, not facts, and they don't nest neatly inside each other. So what should you preserve? Entities and the relationships between them, with the relationships stored separately from the entities. A customer lives at an address during a date range. That date range matters because people move. An address sits inside a block group. A block group is contained in or overlaps a ZCTA, and the overlap is partial and needs a weight. A business operates at a point and draws from some catchment area you have to estimate rather than assume. A device is observed at a place in a week, and a device is not a person, and a person is not a household. Each of those arrows is a place where information degrades, and if you keep the arrows visible, you keep the degradation visible. The mental image I'd hold: don't flatten the city into a spreadsheet. Keep it as a graph with typed nodes and typed edges, where every edge knows how competent it is and when it was true. Now, the part the question specifically asks for. 3 joins, imputations, or assumptions you would refuse to make directly. Let me walk you through the flavor of these so you can build your own.
Refusal 1.
You will not take the median household income of a block group and write it into a customer record as that customer's income. This is the ecological fallacy, and it is the original sin of this entire field. The average of a group is not a property of a member of that group. In a block group with a median income of 90,000, there are people making 200 and people making 20. And the fashion relevant thing about them, their discretionary spend, is even more spread out than their income. The intermediate step is keep it as a context variable tagged with its level, and let a model that understands levels use it as context rather than as a personal attribute. If you want an individual estimate, you need individual evidence, or you need to say out loud that you're estimating a group tendency and not a person. Refusal 2. You will not join zip-level card spending to block group demographics by matching centroids. Centroid matching says, this block group center point falls inside this zip. Therefore, they're the same place, which is fine right up until the block group straddles a boundary, or the zip is a weird tentacle shape, or the centroid lands in a park. The intermediate step is areal interpolation with population weighting. You split the value across the overlapping pieces in proportion to how many people live in each piece. And better still, weight by where people live rather than by raw land area, using something like housing unit counts. And then you carry the resulting uncertainty forward instead of pretending the number got cleaner because you did arithmetic to it. That's the pattern, by the way. Arithmetic does not create information. It can only move it around and lose some. Refusal 3. You will not treat a mobile device as a person or a visit as a customer. Foot traffic panels are samples of devices that have location permissions on in apps that sell the data, weighted up to look like a population. That weighting is a model. The panel skews by age, by phone type, by app usage. A device that dwells 40 minutes in your store might be your customer, might be her friend, might be an employee, might be somebody in the coffee shop next door, because the geofence is a rectangle, and rectangles don't respect walls. The intermediate step is to treat foot traffic as a relative signal, week over week, store versus store, and to validate the panel against something you own outright, like point-of-sale transaction counts, before you trust the level of it at all. If you want a fourth, here's a free one that people rarely think of. Don't impute households by grouping customers who share an address. Apartment buildings, dorms, 2 roommates who both love the brand. You'll merge 2 real customers into one fake household and destroy your repeat purchase math. And here's the fashion-specific one I'd love to see somebody write. Do not assume the shipping address is the customer's home. In this category, gifting is enormous, seasonal, and concentrated exactly in the months you care about most. If you build a geography of your customer base out of shipping addresses, every December you will discover a thrilling new market that is other people's mothers. That's the question. Show that you know the objects are different kinds of things, show the relationships you'd keep, and show 3 refusals with the repair. Do that in 250 tight words, and you're done. Question 2. Explaining why the existing customer pattern exists. This one is my favorite. I'm going to tell you why, and then I'm going to tell you how to answer it. The setup. Your customers are packed into 3 rich neighborhoods. The growth team's plan is to go find more rich neighborhoods. And the question tells you, flat out, that you are not allowed to say yes or no until you can explain why the concentration exists. That instruction is the whole test, because the growth team's plan contains a hidden claim, and the hidden claim is, our customers are concentrated in rich neighborhoods because rich people like us. And that might be true. It might also be completely backwards. And the difference between those 2 worlds is hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let me give you the alternative story. Somebody at this brand, 2 years ago, set up the first paid campaigns. They put in a geographic target because you have to put in something, and they picked the neighborhoods where they thought the customer was. Money went there, conversions came from there. The platform's optimization engine saw conversions coming from there and sent more money there, because that's what optimization engines do.
Retargeting pools filled up with those people. Lookalike audiences got built from those people. 2 years later, you open the dashboard and it says, our customer is affluent and lives in these 3 neighborhoods. Congratulations, you've discovered your own media plan. This is a feedback loop, and it's the most common way a brand builds a completely false picture of itself. The data is real, the conclusion is a hall of mirrors. So, competing explanations. The question gives you a list to consider, and I want to walk through them with actual fashion mechanics attached, because consider price architecture means nothing until you can say what it looks like in the wild. Demand and product market fit. The honest version of the growth team story. These people want the product more. Test. Does conversion hold up in places you never targeted? Is there organic search interest, unpaid, from outside the 3 neighborhoods? Do people from elsewhere find you and buy without being pushed? Exposure. The hall of mirrors. Test. Pull historical impression delivery by geography and put it next to conversion. Compute conversion rate conditional on exposure, not raw conversion volume. If a neighborhood got 100,000 impressions and another got 400, of course the first one has more customers. That's not preference, that's arithmetic. Access. Where does the store sit? Where does the pop-up go? Is shipping free above a threshold that's easy for one group and painful for another? Are returns free, and is there a physical place to do them? Because return friction is a purchase barrier disguised as a post-purchase problem. If your only return option is printing a label, you've quietly filtered for people who own printers or live near a drop-off. Historical ad delivery, which I've covered, but add the human layer. Who did the founder know? Who got the first seating boxes? Which stylists got gifted? Which 3 friends posted the first fit pics? Fashion brands almost always start as a social graph, and social graphs are geographic. Your first 100 customers are frequently a map of somebody's group chat. Local retail structure. Is there a boutique in those neighborhoods that stocks adjacent brands, so the customer already has a habit of shopping that category in that place? Complementary retail creates demand for you without you doing anything. If there's a well-merchandised multi-brand store 2 doors down, you inherit its foot traffic and its taste education. Mobility patterns. Where do people go? Not just where do they sleep. A neighborhood with a huge daytime population, offices, a transit hub, a university, has a customer base that lives somewhere else entirely. If your store is in a commercial district and you geocode customers by store visit, you'll conclude your customer lives in an office park. Price architecture. Not just, is it expensive? Is the entry price point in the range where somebody unfamiliar with you will take a risk? Is there a gateway item? Does installment payment change who can transact? Payment method availability shifts the accessible market in ways that look like taste when you squint at it later. Selection effects. Your email list came from somewhere. Your first press hit came from somewhere. If a local magazine covered you, your customer base now has the shape of that magazine's readership forever, and nobody will remember that's why. And then, the one that isn't on their list, which is measurement artifact. Geocoding quality varies. Affluent neighborhoods have cleaner address data, fewer P.O. boxes, fewer apartment number errors, fewer failed matches. If 10% of your orders fail to geocode and those failures are concentrated in dense multi-unit housing, your map is lying to you in a specific and biased direction before anybody even interprets it. Now, the question asks, what evidence distinguishes preference from exposure? Here's how I'd think about it.
The cleanest evidence is a place where exposure was 0 or near 0, and you can look at what happened anyway. Organic traffic by geography, direct type-ins, branded search volume, waitlist signups, people who found you through a friend. If a neighborhood you never advertised to is quietly producing customers at a decent rate, that's preference talking, and it's loud. The second cleanest is conversion rate conditional on comparable exposure, not volume, rate. If you can find pairs of areas that received similar impressions and compare their response, you've stripped out the delivery effect. The third, and the one that costs money but settles the argument, a geographic holdout. Turn spend off in a set of matched markets. Watch what happens to baseline sales. That's the only way to see the counterfactual, and we'll talk about that machinery more in question 5. And the finding that would make me call the target profile an artifact, if, conditional on exposure, conversion rate is basically flat across income levels, then income was never the driver. Income was the targeting parameter. The apparent segment is a description of where the money was spent, and copying it into new neighborhoods just buys the same mirror in a different frame. Write that. Write the mechanism, the test, and the flat line result. 300 words. Somebody in that review room is going to sit up. Question 3. Combining information measured at different scales. Okay, this is the technical heart of the whole assessment, and I want to make it feel simple because it kind of is. You've got 7 different levels of data: individual transactions, device weeks, business locations, block groups, zip codes, county years, metro quarters, and somebody wants one number out the other end: a consumer opportunity score. The temptation is to just flatten it. Attach the county unemployment rate to every transaction. Attach the zip median rent to every customer. Throw it in a model and get your score. And it will produce a number. It will produce a very confident number. Here's the problem, and it has 2 names, and knowing both names is worth points on its own. The ecological fallacy. Taking a group-level pattern and applying it to individuals. Neighborhoods with higher rent buy more outerwear. Therefore, this person, who lives in a high-rent neighborhood, buys more outerwear. The relationship between variables at the group level can be different in size, and sometimes different in direction than the relationship at the individual level. The atomistic fallacy, which nobody remembers, is the reverse, taking an individual pattern and assuming it explains the group. Your customers who spend more tend to be older. Therefore, older neighborhoods are better markets. Not necessarily, because the composition of a place isn't the sum of its people in the way you'd expect. And then there's the modifiable areal unit problem, which is the fun one. The MAUP says that your results depend on how you drew the boundaries. Same underlying data, different geographic units, different answer. Not a little different, sometimes reversed. You can change a correlation coefficient substantially by aggregating the same points into different shapes. So any score built on areal units carries a silent dependence on somebody's boundary drawing choices. And the honest response is not to pretend it away, but to check whether your conclusion survives being rerun at a different unit. So what's the defensible move? 2 ideas. And you only need to communicate that you understand them, not implement them. First, keep levels as levels. Use a model that has a place for group-level effects. In plain speech, that's a model that says there is a person effect and there is a neighborhood effect, and they are separate things, and I'm going to estimate both instead of smearing one into the other. That's a multi-level model, or a hierarchical model, or mixed effects, all roughly the same family. The magic of it is partial pooling. A neighborhood with 4 customers doesn't get to have a wild estimate based on 4 people because the model pulls it back toward the overall average in proportion to how little evidence there is. Small samples get shrunk. That's not a hack. That's the correct handling of weak evidence done automatically.
Second, separate the within-group effect from the between-group effect. There's a simple trick where you split a variable into this person's value relative to their neighborhood's average and this neighborhood's average, and put both in the model. Now you can see whether the effect is about the person or about the place, which is frequently the exact question the business is asking without knowing it. For time, use as-of joins. When you attach a quarterly economic indicator to a transaction, attach the value that was known at that moment, not the value that got revised 9 months later. Economic data gets revised. If you use the revised figure, your model has information from the future, and it will look great in validation and fall apart in deployment. Leakage. It's always leakage. Every model that seems too good has a little time machine hidden in it somewhere. Now they ask you to pick one contextual variable and be precise about it.
Let me do rent burden because it's the most interesting one in this category, and I want to show you what precise sounds like. Rent burden is the share of household income going to rent. When is it useful? It's a proxy for discretionary flexibility that income alone doesn't capture. Two households at the same income, one paying 20% of it in rent and one paying 50, have completely different apparel budgets and completely different timing. High rent burden tends to mean spend is compressed into the days right after payday, more sensitivity to promotions, more interest in payment installments, more secondhand and rental behavior, and a stronger pull toward pieces that read as versatile because the price per wear calculation is running in that person's head at the register. Those are real, testable, fashion-relevant behaviors. When does it become misleading? When it stops measuring what you think. A neighborhood full of graduate students has crushing rent burden and a household income figure that's temporarily meaningless. A neighborhood of recent movers has rent burden reflecting current market rate, while long-tenured neighbors in the same block group pay half that, and the average sits between two realities that don't exist. Dense urban cores can show high rent burden alongside high consumption because people trade housing space for location and lifestyle deliberately. And if rent burden is strongly correlated with income in your particular metro, it's contributing very little new information while making your model look more sophisticated, which is a popular thing for a variable to do. How do you represent the uncertainty? The census publishes margins of error on these estimates, and for small geographies, those margins are sometimes embarrassing. Use them. Carry them. You can sample from the estimate's distribution and rerun the score to see how much it wobbles. Or you can use a measurement error model that treats the reported value as a noisy read on a true value. At minimum, report your score with an interval and flag which geographies have estimates so imprecise they shouldn't drive a decision at all. And say the thing out loud. This variable enters as context at its own level with its own uncertainty, and it never becomes a fact about a person. If you write that sentence, you've answered the hardest part of question 3. Question 4. Finding an adjacent market that doesn't look like your current customer. Okay, this is the fun one. This is where fashion knowledge earns its keep, and where most people write the persona paragraph and lose. The question: find a commercially meaningful adjacent consumer base that is not the obvious demographic lookalike. Behaviorally or structurally adjacent, even if it looks different on age, neighborhood, occupation, everything on the surface. So first, let me explain why the obvious lookalike is a bad idea in business terms, so you can say it with conviction. A demographic lookalike is, by construction, the people most similar to the people you already have, which means you're competing for them with every brand that already has them, you're buying the most expensive inventory in the auction, and you're growing into the part of the market where you're least differentiated. You're paying a premium to be one of 11 options.
A structural adjacency is different. It's a group whose life produces the same need your product answers through a completely different route. They don't look like your customer. They have the same problem as your customer. Here's the shift in thinking. Stop asking, who is my customer? Start asking, what has to be true about someone's week for this product to make sense in it? That's the construct level question, and constructs are exactly what the assessment is asking you to infer. Let me give you the ones that matter in this category. Occasion density. How many times per month does this person's life generate a situation where what they wear is evaluated? Not judged in a mean way, evaluated. Read. A person with 3 of those a month is a fundamentally different customer from a person with 12, and their income might be identical. Occasion density is generated by things like hospitality and nightlife work, church attendance, a job with client-facing meetings, a music scene, a photography habit, a wedding-heavy age cohort, a campus calendar, an active dating life, a hobby with a social component. Replacement cycle. How fast does this person's wardrobe turn over, and why? Wear out, size change, taste change, or job change. Somebody who just changed careers has a compressed, urgent, high-intent wardrobe need that has nothing to do with their demographics and everything to do with a discontinuity in their life. New job, new city, postpartum, weight change, graduation. These are the highest intent moments in apparel, and they are almost never targeted directly because they're invisible in demographic data. Aesthetic vocabulary.
Does this person have a developed reference set? Can they name what they like? A person with a strong aesthetic vocabulary shops differently. They search by specific terms. They cross-shop by silhouette rather than by brand. They have a higher tolerance for unusual pieces and a lower tolerance for generic ones. Vocabulary is trained by exposure, and exposure comes from communities, not from income. Price per wear reasoning. Some people compute it, some people don't. The ones who do will spend more on a single item and less overall, respond to durability and versatility claims, and behave completely differently in a sale. This is a mindset that cuts straight across income. Discovery route. How does this person find new brands? Through creators? Through a friend? Through a physical store? Through resale? Through search? Two people with the same taste and the same budget who discover things through different routes are two different marketing problems and effectively two different segments. Those 5 constructs are worth more than any demographic table you will ever be handed. Now, signals. Which observable things would you combine to infer those constructs? For occasion density, local business composition, but the specific kind. Nail salons and braiding shops and barbers per capita, and their appointment cadence. Event venues, small ones, not stadiums. Photography studios, places of worship. Restaurant and bar density weighted by evening activity. Mobility data showing evening and weekend trips rather than commute trips. In an Atlanta context, you'd be reckless to ignore the homecoming calendar, the church economy, and a beauty industry that anchors an entire annual trade rhythm. Those generate occasions on a schedule you can literally put on a calendar. For replacement cycle and life discontinuity, household turnover rates, new mover data, the mix of lease lengths, employment composition changes, the presence of training programs and licensure schools. For aesthetic vocabulary, search query specificity. Are people in this area searching black dress, or are they searching for a specific cut, a specific era, a specific designer reference? Resale platform activity, because secondhand shopping requires and builds vocabulary. Saved item behavior on your own site. People who save unusual pieces are telling you something. For discovery route, referral source distribution, creator audience overlap, whether the area over-indexes on physical retail visits versus online. Now the technical part they're specifically testing. How do you stop correlated variables from being counted as independent evidence?
This matters because all of the signals I just listed are tangled together. Salon density, restaurant density, evening mobility, and event venues are 4 measurements of roughly one thing. If you throw all 4 into a clustering algorithm, that one underlying thing gets 4 votes, and it will dominate your clusters while looking like 4 independent confirmations. Your model will have found the same fact 4 times and gotten very excited about it. The fix, conceptually, build the constructs first, then cluster on constructs. Reduce the correlated block into one dimension, whether by factor analysis, principal components, or just a defensible weighted index you can explain. Check the correlation structure before you model, not after. If 2 variables sit above a high correlation with each other, pick one or combine them. And if you're running a regression rather than clustering, look at variance inflation, because collinear predictors produce unstable coefficients that flip sign when you add one more data point. There's also a spatial version of this problem that almost nobody mentions, and that would make me remember your answer. Neighboring areas are correlated with each other. If you treat 200 adjacent block groups as 200 independent observations, your effective sample size is much smaller than 200. Your confidence intervals are too narrow, and everything looks significant. Spatial autocorrelation is a sample size illusion. Last part. What makes a discovered cluster real rather than a statistical artifact? 4 gates, and I'd write all 4. Stability. Rerun the clustering on a different time window, on a bootstrap resample, with a different number of clusters, with one input dropped. Does the group survive? A real segment is stubborn. An artifact dissolves the moment you look at it from a slightly different angle. Replication. Does the same structure appear in a metro you didn't use to build it? If your segment only exists in Atlanta, it might be Atlanta, not a segment. Reachability. And this is the one that gets skipped. Can you buy this audience? A cluster defined by 17 interacting variables might be perfectly real and completely unaddressable because no ad platform, creator, retail partner, or mailing list corresponds to it. A segment you cannot reach is a research finding, not a market. Before you get attached, sketch the real route. Which creators, which places, which partnerships, which targeting parameters. Economics. Size times expected contribution margin has to clear the cost of reaching them. A tiny high-affinity cluster can be wonderful or worthless, depending entirely on margin and retention. And then the only real test. Spend a small amount of money against a holdout and see if the effect shows up. Which brings us, conveniently, question 5. Does the campaign create value, or is it just finding people who are going to buy anyway? This is the most important question in the entire assessment. And if you write one truly excellent answer, make it this one. Because this is the question that separates people who understand marketing measurement from people who read dashboards. The setup. Segment X converts at 6.2%, segment Y at 4.1%. Move the money to X, obviously. Except X also had higher purchase intent before the campaign and got more ad exposure historically. So what does the 6.2% measure? It measures a mixture. Some of those conversions happened because of the ad. Some of them would have happened anyway, and the ad just got there first and took the credit. And the second group can be most of it. Here's the thing that reframes everything. The number you care about is not conversion rate. It's the difference between what happened and what would have happened without the ad. That difference has a name, incrementality, and it is not observable, ever, for any individual person. You cannot show someone an ad and also not show them an ad. So the entire discipline is about constructing a credible stand-in for a world that didn't happen. Why does a highly accurate conversion model recommend the wrong audience? This is the crux, and the answer is beautiful.
A conversion model ranks people by how likely they are to buy. The people at the top of that ranking are the people who are already going to buy. Your loyal customer who visits the site twice a week, has 3 items saved, and is waiting for payday. She has a very high predicted conversion probability. And the ad's effect on her is approximately 0 because she was coming regardless. Meanwhile, there's somebody who saw your brand once, thought it was interesting, and forgot. Low predicted probability. But an ad at the right moment moves her a lot. Her baseline is low and her lift is high. So prediction accuracy and persuadability are different quantities, and the model that's excellent at one tells you nothing about the other. Target by predicted conversion and you spend your budget on people who are already converting, then report a spectacular return on ad spend that is mostly just your existing customers, billed back to you at a markup. The industry has been doing this for years and calling it performance marketing. The frame I'd use. Everybody in your audience falls into one of 4 buckets. People who buy either way, people who buy neither way, people who buy only if you reach them, and, uncomfortably, people who would have bought but get annoyed and don't. The only bucket worth paying for is the third one. A conversion model finds the first, an uplift model tries to find the third, by modeling the difference in outcome between treated and untreated rather than the outcome itself. Now, the design. What's the minimum you'd want? Randomization at the right level. You need a genuine holdout, a randomly selected group that does not receive the campaign, not a group that didn't happen to see it because that group self-selected. If the platform supports it, a public service ad holdout or a ghost bid holdout is cleaner because the holdout group goes through the same auction and the same eligibility filter and simply gets something else served. That controls for the fact that ad delivery is itself selective. If individual randomization isn't possible, go geographic. Matched market test where you pair similar metros or zip clusters on pre-period sales trends and randomize at the cluster level. Or a synthetic control approach where you build a weighted combination of untreated markets that tracks the treated market's pre-period behavior closely and use that as the counterfactual. Measured before exposure, non-negotiable. Pre-period purchase frequency and recency, pre-period spend, baseline site engagement, existing customer status, historical exposure, seasonality position, and any promotion running concurrently. Pre-registered, written down before you look at results, because the moment you start choosing covariates after seeing outcomes, you're just decorating a conclusion. Contamination and spillover. Randomizing individuals fails when people share things, and in fashion, they share everything. Same household, same devices, same social feed, same group chat where somebody posts the link. If your treated person shows the coat to her untreated sister and the sister buys, your control group is contaminated and your measured lift is too small. The fix is to randomize at the level of the sharing unit, household, or geography, and accept the loss of statistical power as the price of a clean answer. And run the test long enough to see the purchase cycle through, because apparel consideration windows are not one day. Which metric governs deployment? Incremental contribution margin per dollar spent. Say all three parts. Incremental, because non-incremental conversions are not a business result. Contribution margin, not revenue, because in apparel, the gap between the two is enormous once you subtract cost of goods, fulfillment, payment processing, and, critically, returns. A segment can produce beautiful revenue lift and negative margin lift if half of it comes back. Per dollar spent, because you're allocating a fixed budget and what you need is a ranking of efficiency at the margin, not a total. And I'd add, measure it at the margin, not on average. The right question is never, is this campaign profitable, but is the next dollar into this segment more productive than the next dollar into that one? Response curves flatten. Saturation is real. Average returns hide the fact that you passed the useful point 3 weeks ago.
Write that answer with the 4-bucket frame, the holdout design, the contamination fix, and the margin metric, and you will have written something that a lot of working professionals could not write. Question 6. Turning a human desire into a campaign mechanism you can defend. Okay, slow down for this one. This is the question that looks the softest and is secretly the most rigorous. The setup. Research says a consumer group wants some future state, belonging, credibility, distinction, confidence. And research says there's an obstacle between them and it. Your job, figure out whether that obstacle is real or whether the marketer invented it. Why would that even be a question? Because marketing has a long and slightly embarrassing history of manufacturing the problem it sells the solution to. Somebody decides the consumer suffers from a thing, builds a campaign that teaches the consumer to suffer from the thing, and then measures the campaign's success by how many people now say they suffer from the thing. Circular. Profitable sometimes. Fragile always. Because the moment the messaging stops, the constraint evaporates, and so does the business. So how do you tell the difference? Here's my test, and it's simple. A real constraint leaves fingerprints in behavior that nobody prompted. That's it.
If the obstacle exists, people are already doing something costly about it in places where you were not asking. So go look at unprompted evidence. Search queries people typed with nobody watching. Return reasons in the free text field. Customer service transcripts. Abandoned cart behavior and where in the flow it happens. Forum threads and comment sections. Resale listings and what the seller says about why they're letting it go. The questions people ask a salesperson in a fitting room. If the constraint is real, you'll find it in at least 2 channels that have nothing to do with each other, described in the customer's own words before you ever say it out loud. Manufactured constraints have a signature too. They show up strongly in surveys and weakly everywhere else. They appear only when the question names them, which is demand characteristics doing what demand characteristics do. People are agreeable, and if you ask, "Do you struggle to know what to wear to work events?" a certain fraction will say yes to be helpful. Ask an open question instead. Tell me about the last time you got dressed for something and it didn't go how you wanted. If the constraint doesn't surface unprompted in that, be suspicious of it. And run a base rate check on a population that has never seen your messaging. If the constraint's prevalence is the same among people who've never encountered your brand as among people who have, good. It's endogenous to their lives. If it's much higher among the exposed, you made it. Now the chain. They want desired state, to observed constraint, to product mechanism, to campaign, to measurable outcome. Every link has to hold. Let me build one so you can see what connected means. Desired state. A person starting a job in a workplace with no dress code but real status stakes wants to look like they belong there before anyone knows their work. Observed constraint. Not she lacks confidence, which is a feeling and not a constraint. The constraint is decision cost under ambiguity. She doesn't know what the room's register is, the cost of getting it wrong feels asymmetric, and so she either overbuys, defaults to something safe and forgettable, or spends a disproportionate amount of time and mental effort per morning. Fingerprints you'd look for. Searches for the situation rather than the garment. Longer browse to purchase time in that category. Higher rate of buying multiples of the same item in different sizes or colors, which is a hedging behavior. Return reasons about fit and appropriateness rather than defect. Questions to customer service that are about context, not product.
Product mechanism. This is where it has to be a real feature, not a feeling. Pieces that read correctly across a wide range of formality, so one purchase covers several ambiguous situations. Fit and sizing information precise enough that the hedging purchase becomes unnecessary. Styling guidance attached to the specific situation rather than to the garment. Each of those is a physical or operational property of the offer that directly reduces the specific cost you named. Campaign. Show the ambiguous moment, not the product on a white background. The creative job is recognition. If she sees it and thinks, "That's my Tuesday," the constraint and the mechanism connect in her head without you having to explain the chain. Measurable outcome. And these have to be tied to the constraint, not to the campaign. Time from first view to purchase, which should shrink if you've reduced decision cost. Multi-size ordering rate, which should fall if you've reduced hedging. Fit-related return rate specifically, separated from other return reasons. Repeat purchase within the same category within a defined window, because somebody whose problem was solved comes back for the second one. Items per order that form a complete outfit rather than a single hedge. Notice what's happening. Every outcome I named would move if the constraint were relieved, and would not move just because a lot of people liked a video. That's the design principle. Pick metrics that only move if the mechanism worked, not metrics that move whenever the media performs. Last part, and answer it crisply. One result that forces you to abandon the story even if engagement is high. I'd offer this one. Run the campaign with a matched creative that has the same aesthetic, the same talent, the same production quality, the same media weight, but makes no claim about the constraint at all. A placebo, essentially. If the constraint-based creative performs the same as the placebo on the constraint-specific metrics, then your mechanism isn't doing anything. People like the images. The story is decoration. Or, simpler and equally fatal, engagement is enormous, and the fit-related return rate does not move at all. High engagement with a flat constraint metric means you made content, not a solution. Which is fine, it's just not what you said you were doing, and the budget was approved on the basis of what you said you were doing. Question 7. Building a digital representation of the market before you spend. Okay, the word people reach for here is simulation. And the instant they reach for it, they start building something enormous. Resist that. The question says, smallest useful model. And it means it. The word smallest is doing real work in that sentence. So here's the reframe that makes this question tractable. You are not building a crystal ball. You are building an argument you can poke at. The purpose of a model like this is to compare strategies against each other and to find out which assumptions the ranking depends on. That's it. If the model tells you that creator partnerships beat local events under every plausible parameter setting, that's a genuine finding. If it tells you creator partnerships will generate $412,000, that's a number-shaped object, and you should not put it in a deck. Entities. Keep it to 3 types. Consumers. State variables. Awareness of the brand, which decays over time. Consideration, meaning they've engaged in some way. Affinity, meaning aesthetic fit, which you can treat as a fixed trait sampled from a distribution. A budget or spending capacity. Wardrobe state, meaning how recently they bought and therefore how much need they currently have. A home location and an activity space, which is not the same thing. And a set of social ties with weights. Channels or reach nodes. Creators, media placements, retail partners, events. Each has a reach, a cost structure, an audience composition that overlaps with other nodes, and a credibility weight, because a recommendation from a creator someone trusts is not the same input as an impression. Places. Store or event locations with a catchment, which you estimate rather than assume, plus a time component because catchments differ on a Tuesday and a Saturday. Rules. Also keep it small. 4.
Exposure and decay. Contact raises awareness. Awareness decays. Repeated contact has diminishing returns, so the response to frequency should be a curve that flattens, not a line. Getting this one shape right matters more than adding 10 new features. Social transmission. An aware, high-affinity consumer can transmit to a tie with some probability. This is the mechanism that makes creator strategies and event strategies behave differently from pure media buys, and it's also the parameter you know the least about, which we'll deal with in a second. Purchase. Model it as a hazard, meaning a probability of purchasing in each time step that depends on awareness, affinity, budget, wardrobe need, and price, not a fixed conversion rate, a rate that rises and falls with state. Saturation and competition for attention. Each additional dollar into the same channel reaches a more marginal person. Without this rule, your model will recommend infinite spend, which is a well-known failure and an easy one to check for. Which parameters come from real data? Say them specifically, because this is where the answer earns credibility. Reach and frequency curves come from platform delivery data. Audience overlap between creators comes from panel or follower intersection data. Store catchments come from foot traffic and from your own order geography. Purchase hazard and its relationship to recency come from your transaction history, and the wardrobe need dynamics come from inter-purchase timing. Awareness decay you can approximate from re-engagement curves, how quickly people who lapse stop responding. Price sensitivity comes from past promotional periods, imperfectly. Which parameters can you not estimate? Social transmission probability, cross-channel synergy, and the credibility weight of a creator. Do not fake these. Declare them as ranges and sweep them. Then report which conclusions survive the whole range and which flip. A conclusion that holds across the full plausible range of an unknown parameter is a conclusion you can spend money on. A conclusion that flips at some point inside the range tells you exactly which experiment to run first, the one that pins down that parameter. Which outputs do you trust? Rankings, thresholds, and shapes.
Trust the ordering of strategies, especially when it's stable across parameter sweeps. Trust the saturation point, the spin level where the curve visibly bends, because that's driven by structure rather than by calibration. Trust break-even conditions stated as conditionals. Events beat media only if social transmission is above this value. Trust the direction of sensitivity, meaning which lever the outcome cares about most. Do not trust absolute revenue. Do not trust the specific number of customers acquired, and do not trust anything about a channel that isn't represented in your training data, because the model can only be wrong in the ways you taught it to be wrong. Validation, and please include this because it's the part everyone skips. Backcast. Hold out a real historical period, feed the model the spin that occurred, and see whether it reproduces roughly what happened. Not exactly. Roughly and with the right shape. Degenerate cases. Set spin to 0. Does the brand decay sensibly, or does it collapse instantly or grow from nothing? Set spin absurdly high. Does the model saturate, or does it happily predict you'll acquire more customers than exist in the metro? You'd be surprised. Sensitivity analysis. Vary every parameter, one at a time and then jointly, and rank the outputs by how much they move. If your headline result depends entirely on a parameter you invented, you have not built a model. You've built a very expensive restatement of your own opinion. Beat a naive baseline. Compare against something dumb like allocate in proportion to last year's performance. If the simulation can't beat the dumb rule out of sample, use the dumb rule and save everyone the time. And face validity. Show it to a retail manager or a merchandiser and describe what it predicts. If someone with 15 years on the floor says, "That's not how Saturdays work," they're probably right and your model is missing something structural.
The model's real job is to eliminate bad plans cheaply and to tell you which uncertainty is worth paying to reduce. Say that in your answer, and you've said the sophisticated thing. Question 8. Making a decision when the evidence contradicts itself. The final boss. 4 segments. Segment A. Highest spending, highest click-through, no evidence of incremental lift. Segment B. Lower spending, strong incremental response, higher return rate. Segment C. Small, expensive to reach, unusually high gross margin and retention. Segment D. Looks promising from local business and mobility patterns, but the sample is weak. $100,000. Go. And the instruction that makes this a real test? You may not answer that more data is needed. They closed the emergency exit. Which is correct, because in the actual job, we need more data is a thing people say when they want the meeting to end without having to be accountable for anything. First move, define the objective, explicitly, in one sentence before anything else. Because where should we spend it is unanswerable until you say what you're maximizing. I'd write something like, maximize expected incremental contribution margin over a 12-month window, subject to preserving enough learning to make the next 100,000 a better decision than this one. 2-part objective, return plus information. That second clause is not padding. When you're uncertain, some of your budget's job is to buy knowledge, and knowledge compounds across every future allocation. A pure return-maximizing allocation under deep uncertainty is usually worse over 2 periods than one that spends a slice on resolving the biggest unknown. Say that, and you sound like someone who has allocated a budget more than once. Second move, rank the evidence by how much you trust it, and say why in causal terms. The most trustworthy thing on the table is segment B's incremental response, because incrementality is the only evidence here that has a counterfactual behind it. Everything else is a correlation with a nice outfit on. The least trustworthy is segment A's click-through rate. Click-through measures attention, and it measures it among people already predisposed toward you. High spend plus high clicks plus 0 lift is the exact signature of an audience you are paying to reach people who were already yours. Segment A is not a growth segment. Segment A might be a retention asset, which is a different budget line and a much cheaper one.
Segment D's signal is the weakest but not worthless. Weak sample means wide uncertainty, and wide uncertainty means high option value because the upside tail is live. That's an argument for a small, properly powered test, not for a large bet and not for ignoring it. Segment C is interesting because the economics are inverted from everything else. Small and expensive to reach, which is bad. High gross margin and high retention, which is very good, and retention is the variable that compounds. High acquisition cost is survivable when lifetime value is high. The question is whether the segment is big enough for the math to matter at scale. Third move, put everything in the same currency. This is the analytical center of the answer, and it's just careful arithmetic. You cannot compare high spending to strong lift to high margin because those are three different units. Convert all of them to expected incremental contribution margin per dollar of spend. Roughly, take the incremental conversion rate, not the observed one. Multiply by average order value. Multiply by gross margin percentage. Multiply by 1 minus the return rate. And be careful here, because returns cost you more than the refund. You lose the revenue, you eat outbound and return shipping, you pay processing, you take a haircut on the returned unit if it can't go back to full price, and you pay someone to handle it. The margin-adjusted cost of a return is meaningfully worse than the sticker version. Then apply a repeat purchase multiplier for the time window you chose. Then subtract acquisition cost.
Run that for B and it might get uncomfortable. Strong lift and a high return rate can partially cancel. But notice why the returns might be high. If they're fit related, that's an operational problem with a known fix, sizing guidance, better fit data, and it's improvable. If they're because the segment responds to discounting and buys speculatively, that's a segment quality problem and it won't improve. Same number, two completely different futures. Diagnose the return, don't just subtract it. Fourth move, make the call. Split it, but split it with reasons attached, not as a hedge. Something in this shape. The majority to B, because it's the only place with demonstrated causal response and the returns problem has a diagnosable fix. A meaningful slice to C, sized so that even if acquisition cost comes in worse than expected, the retention economics still clear, and treated as an efficiency test rather than a volume play. A deliberately small, statistically powered slice to D, with the test designed to be conclusive rather than suggestive, because an underpowered test on a weak signal produces another ambiguous meeting in 6 weeks, and that's the worst outcome available. And little or nothing new to A, moved instead to owned channels, because you can maintain that relationship with email and lifecycle at a fraction of paid cost, and doing so also tells you whether paid was ever doing anything there. Whatever numbers you pick, defend them with the objective you declared at the top. That's what makes it a decision rather than a division. Fifth move, name the next experiment specifically, not test more. Say what, at what scale, measured how, for how long, with what holdout, and what result would change the allocation. For B, a geographic holdout test at scale, running long enough to observe the purchase cycle and a full return window, measuring incremental contribution margin net of returns rather than conversions. And in parallel, an operational test on the return driver, because if fit information cuts fit-related returns even modestly, B's economics move a lot. For D, a single adequately powered test in the most concentrated area, sized in advance so it can reject the hypothesis rather than just producing another shrug. Sixth move, and don't leave it out, the reversal condition. One specific result that flips your decision. Mine would be this. If B's return rate is not driven by fit but by promotional sensitivity, and the 90-day repeat rate for B-acquired customers comes in below the threshold where the acquisition cost pays back inside the window, then B's lift is buying transactions rather than customers, and the money should move to C, where retention is already proven, even though C is expensive. Write that sentence. A specific, quantitative, falsifiable reversal condition is the single most professional thing you can put in this assessment, and it takes 20 words. Okay,
That's all 8. Let me close with the stuff nobody tells you, which is how to write these. First, on structure. For each answer, I'd use roughly the same skeleton, and I'd let you see the skeleton. Something like, here's what I think the question is really about. Here's my position. Here's the mechanism or reasoning that supports it. Here's what I'm assuming. Here's what would change my mind. 4 or 5 short paragraphs, 250 words. Done. Consistency across the 8 is a feature. It reads as a method rather than 8 separate performances. Second, on specificity. Every time you write a general statement, ask whether you can attach a concrete instance to it. Correlated variables inflate confidence is fine. Salon density, evening mobility, and venue count are 3 measurements of one underlying thing, so entering all 3 gives that one thing triple weight, is the same idea, and it's the version that gets remembered. The general statement proves you've read something. The instance proves you've thought about it.
Third, on uncertainty. Say it with numbers or with conditions, not with adverbs. Possibly, perhaps, it may be the case that is not calibration, it's just fog. This holds if the panel's device coverage in low-income areas is within about 10% of its coverage elsewhere, and I'd check that before relying on it, is calibration. One of those sounds nervous. The other sounds like a colleague. Fourth, and I want to be direct with you here, you will be tempted to hide the fact that you don't know something. Don't. There is no version of this where you're expected to have run a synthetic control study. If you're not sure whether a technique is the right one, write the reasoning and say, I'd want to check whether the sample supports this, and here's what I'd look at. That is a correct professional answer, and it is scored higher than fluent bluffing every time by anyone competent enough to be reading these. Fifth, on time. 60 minutes, 8 questions. That's 7 minutes each with a few left over. So don't polish question 1 for 20 minutes and then panic write questions 6 through 8. Get a rough version of all 8 down first, even if some are 3 sentences. Then spend your remaining time upgrading the weakest ones. A set of 8 solid answers beats 2 brilliant ones and 6 fragments, and it beats them by a lot because the thing being assessed is whether your thinking holds across different kinds of problems. Sixth, read the last line of the assessment description again, because it's a hint. Be prepared to explain and revise your reasoning if an assumption or piece of evidence changes. That means somebody may push back on your answer in a conversation, and the pushback is not a trap. It's the second half of the test. The right response to, what if the panel data is biased, is not to defend your answer to the death. It's, then this part breaks and this part survives, and here's what I'd do instead. Being revisable under new evidence is the skill. Being immovable is just being wrong more slowly. Last thing. I know this document is intimidating on first read. It uses words like ZCTA and quasi-experimental, and it feels like it was written for someone with a different degree than yours. But look at what it's really made of. Every single question is a version of the same human problem. Somebody is about to spend money based on a story, and the story might be true, or it might be the shape of their own past decisions reflected back at them. Fashion is a business where taste, community, timing, and identity produce the demand, and where the numbers are almost always a lagging, partial, slightly distorted record of something that happened socially first. Knowing that is an advantage, not a gap. The person who understands why a brand takes off in one part of a city and dies in another, who knows that a homecoming weekend or a salon appointment cycle or one stylist's group chat can move more units than a media plan, and who also knows not to confuse an area average with a person, that person is rare and worth a lot. So don't write what you think a data person would write. Write what you see, carefully, with your assumptions visible and your reasoning available for someone to push on. That's the whole thing. Go